Welcome to Aligned on AI, the podcast where we have real conversations with business leaders about what's changing in their industries and where AI will actually help. So today I'm joined by Nina Benoit, based in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, who has spent around a decade working in sustainability, responsible business and ESG, and now works as Director of Sustainability at Brightest. She is also the host of the AI Sustainability podcast. Now, Nina works in a particularly interesting part of the AI debate. Businesses increasingly want technology to collect environmental data, improve reporting, and identify better decisions, whilst also keeping their heads down when asked to think about the environmental footprint of using AI to do that work. The cloud, it turns, has rather more concrete in it than the name suggests. So in this conversation, we explore Nina's career journey, where AI genuinely helps sustainability teams, whether it improves poor data or merely processes it more confidently, the physical footprint of data centers, the risk of AI-assisted greenwashing, and how businesses can decide when an AI use case has earned the resources it consumes. We'll also consider whether asking AI to write the sustainability report is efficiency, or irony, or a carefully governed mixture of both. So, Nina, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for the great introduction, Carl.
Yeah, that's fine. So before we ask whether AI can save time without consuming rather too much of everything else, could you talk us through your career journey and what first made sustainability a serious professional direction for you?
Yes, absolutely. So I would say that I started taking sustainability into account in my first business about 10 years ago. This was a small startup I founded in the Netherlands. It was not really sustainability related. It was more related to diet, weight loss, and so on. But then I was working on that business with two other partners. And then I started, bringing my ideas and saying, I want to have recycled paper and I want to have electric vehicles delivering the food. And I was essentially annoying them with all my ideas and more expensive options. But this is really where I started to become really passionate about the topic and tougher as well, bringing my ideas and thoughts and convictions. And then from there, I really continued. I did, some business development after that. And I somehow got involved with the sustainability department and worked on sustainability initiatives. And then eventually I did work as a sustainability manager, which was definitely the place where I wanted to be. And I also worked for a foundation doing donations, which was also really exciting. And now, as you said, currently I'm working as a director of sustainability at Brightest, which is where I would say my tech journey started. And I became a lot more involved with AI agents, and sustainability reporting in particular.
Wow, you've shoehorned in so much in such a short period of time, but your education brought together business, management, and sustainability. Did you begin with the belief that commercial growth and environmental progress should reinforce each other, or has experience made you more skeptical about how easily those interests align?
So I would say when I started studying, I was not so, let's say, focused on sustainability because I just lacked awareness. I didn't really know, I knew about climate change, of course, but I didn't really know about the SDGs. I didn't really know about the relevance of sustainability, the speed at which our Earth was warming. So it was really a lack of knowledge on my end, I would say. And I was really lucky that at university, and I went to two different business schools, Rotterdam School of Management and HEC Paris, which are two leading business schools in Europe. And in both of those studies, they actually had sustainability courses, even though it was not the focus of my studies, right? It was, in my master's it was, but in the bachelor it was not. And that definitely made a tremendous difference as I was coming in, thinking I'm going to be a banker, I'm going to work for a company and just do business. But then as I learned about this topic, and I remember at the time I learned that if everybody lived like me, you would need 5 planets. And that was really a revelation for me because I couldn't imagine that you would need so many planets if everybody lived like me. And that it was really a wake-up call for me to think that I, first of all, needed to change the way I lived, but I also needed to do something about it because, as you know, we only have one planet, right?
Absolutely. It sounds like it gave it another dimension to your sort of business studies, which is great. And obviously you passed it on to your personal life as well as your career. Was there a point where you realized that better intentions were not enough and that organizations needed much stronger systems, better data, accountability to turn sustainability promises maybe into operational decisions?
I definitely understood by working in corporate that you definitely need to align. And this is, of course, what I studied as well, right? How to make a business more profitable, how to have better marketing, how to have a better brand visibility, right? And so I really understood as I started working in corporate that there are ways to combine both, but you also need to be smart about it, right? And I think that if you come in and say, okay, we're going to plant the whole forest and we're going to have so much biodiversity and it's going to be amazing, but there's no return for the business, who's going to pay for that? That's not going to work.
Sure.
And so I really understood that, especially in my previous role as I worked for the large organization with about 3,000 people. And the focus was not necessarily sustainability, but it was rather, just the business, profitability, marketing, that whenever I spoke to people, I started changing my narrative. So focusing more on what they wanted and making sure that I provided a solution to what they wanted that could align so that both our purposes could match. And there are lots of ways to do that. But you just need to make sure that, at least in a large company, unless they're Patagonia, and that's really, the core of their purpose, you really need to align with the goals of the company that you're working for. I think this is, in my opinion, the only way to make sustainability a real business opportunity for companies.
Great. Well, we'll talk a bit more about that a little bit, but just before we go on to that, so you now combine your role at Brightest with speaking, teaching, and hosting the AI Sustainability podcast, has interviewing people with very different views, made your own position on AI more optimistic, more cautious, probably broader, but or simply just more difficult to grapple with the more you find out?
That's a great question. I think perhaps more optimistic, I would say, actually. When I started working on this topic, I really focused on the environmental footprint of AI, which I still do, and it's definitely a big focus of mine. And I'm also writing a book which is called How Green is AI? And so the first part of the book, which is the largest part, was on the environmental footprint of AI, so the negative side. So that was for a while, the focus I had. But then as I started writing the second part, which is all the solutions that AI provides for climate change, waste, and the biodiversity crisis, I was honestly quite amazed to see the amount of solutions out there. And a lot of people reaching out to me for the podcast, of course, are people who want to talk about how great their companies are doing and all their solutions. Through that medium, I've discovered so many amazing solutions and so many really positive ideas. So I would say it definitely rather went in direction because I just didn't know about all these solutions out there and all these great founders and companies that are creating these solutions to fight these environmental issues.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to obviously, network, doing the podcast, just in my own experience this year, just speaking to people that I probably wouldn't have ever really come across if I wasn't doing the podcasting. And then you just get such a wider sort of perspective on different sort of problems and different solutions and the ingenuity and the thinking that's going on. So I completely relate to that. That's really good to hear. But to begin with the problem, maybe rather than the product, what are sustainability teams actually spending their time on these days? And how much of that work is still chasing, cleaning, and reconciling information?
I would definitely say that there are two main things that sustainability teams are doing. The first one is carbon accounting, as obviously as it is I would say, the biggest focus for a lot of companies. We would definitely have this carbon tunnel vision of only focusing on carbon. So I definitely hear a lot about that, about measuring scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions, so indirect and indirect emissions. And then the second one, which is closely related to that, is reporting. So all these regulations that you might have heard about, like the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which is a European directive that has really shaken the European market. or ISSB, the International Sustainability Standard Board, which is sort of the global standard when it comes to sustainability reporting. CDP is another one. EcoVadis, you have multiple of them. So I would say that's probably where sustainability teams are the busiest right now. So essentially doing the carbon accounting and sustainability reporting.
Yeah. And how valuable do you think the reporting is? Is it just bringing more responsibility and accountability to these businesses, or is it actually proving to be a really good tool for those, a genuine tool for those businesses to really make a difference in how they're operating their business from a sustainability angle?
Well, I think in order to report, you need to have something to talk about in the first place. And so in my previous job as a sustainability manager, I did a lot of work in the first year just to implement initiatives, to have things that I could talk about, right? And then only after a year, I started communicating about it, doing pictures and creating web page and so on. But I think that the first place is obviously to have something to talk about. And if you have not done that work, then you should probably not do a sustainability report, in my opinion. So they're complementary, right? And I think that sustainability reporting is essential because if you do all this work, and even internally, right? Because as I noticed in my previous role, I was doing all of these initiatives, but as soon as I started communicating about it, having a web page, having a sustainability report, all those employees were coming to me, telling me, "Oh my God, I love what you did. This is so cool. I didn't know we were doing all of these things." And then even people coming to work for us, where people who applied for jobs that were completely unrelated would look at our sustainability page and then talk about it. And so we also attracted different kind of people to come work in the company, right? So that was really a boomerang effect, so to say, that people would hear more about it in the companies, would get more interested, more people who were interested in sustainability would then apply to work for us. So I definitely think that sustainability reporting is essential, but you need to do your homework before reporting, of course.
Yeah, and I can relate to that. I mean, it's the easiest report to do is your baseline, even though there's a lot of sort of data to get hold of and start to understand and make sense of. But yeah, then the hard work begins, doesn't it, when you're trying to make those improvements. And I think you bring out a really good point there as well around attracting sort of like-minded individuals who want to come and work for you as well. I've seen that myself when running other businesses, that if you project yourself in the right way, in a way that actually truly sort of aligns with your philosophy and your environmental sort of thinking, that you attract like-minded businesses as well. And actually that starts to maybe, I don't know, you could tell me differently, but it maybe starts to encourage businesses to actually put a bit more effort into this, especially when it can be hard to recruit, in certain industries. So does that sound fair, or does that sound I've taken that too far?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think that especially if you're, recruiting more junior people, there's definitely a trend that younger people tend to be more environmentally conscious. And so, of course, if, you're applying for two, let's say, sales jobs, one is for a company that doesn't talk about sustainability, doesn't do anything about it. The other one, same pay, same job, has a really cool web page, a very cool sustainability report, and they talk about how many trees they planted and how many people they helped and how they have done so much. Even if you don't care about sustainability, you're probably going to pick the second one, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, makes sense to me. So you touched on it earlier. You talked about Scope 3 emissions data, that is to say greenhouse gas emissions connected with the business's wider value chains and network is often described as one of the hardest parts of corporate sustainability work. What makes supplier and value chain data particularly difficult and daunting for those who might be doing it for the first time?
So the biggest problem with Scope 3 emissions, as I mentioned earlier, right, is indirect emissions. So essentially your whole supply chain and also the end product, right? So like also after you discard a product, what happens to it? Is it going to be recycled? Is it going to be dumped? How many usage will you have? So it's really the whole life cycle, so to say. And so for Scope 3 emission, the problem is that often case you do not have the data. You need to get it through your suppliers mainly. And you need to ask them, well, I mean, there are different ways of doing it, right? So you could ask them either where your CO2 emissions. So hopefully they're measuring them, which might not be the case and most likely will not be the case depending on the size. Or you need to get the data from them to know, let's say, how much you purchased from them or how many hours of consulting they did, for instance. I mean, there are multiple different metrics that you can use. But the fact that you need to get the data from someone else makes it very difficult, especially if that company is not doing their own carbon accounting, because they will most likely not be prioritizing your requests, as this is sort of an additional task they need to do to give you the data, additional work, which is not bringing them any money, obviously. So this is really the difficulty of doing scope 3 carbon accounting, which, by the way, can account to up to 95%, and in many cases, more than 90% of a company total CO2 emissions. So you really need this information. It's not optional, right? But I would say this is really the main hurdle.
Yeah, and I've experienced it myself. And of course, your suppliers, say, your contractors, your sub-consultants, those who are helping you run the business, they tend to be smaller businesses than you. And if you're doing it for the first time, which is what I was doing maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I remember it vividly, really. It was hard enough for us to get our own house in order in terms of getting those data together, and then to ask that of maybe people who are only 2, 3, 4 staff strong is just nigh on impossible. I'm hoping it's changing. Hopefully it's getting easier, but yeah. And just plain devil's advocate, I mean, if scope 3 figures are built from assumptions, spending proxies, and incomplete supplier returns, when does a sophisticated dashboard risk becoming a very polished display of uncertainty? And does this then risk directing a business's actions in the wrong direction, potentially? I'm being provocative.
I definitely think so. So I did like a study in a previous job in which we compared so we were focusing basically on service-based emissions. So this is getting a bit technical perhaps, but essentially, so within scope 3 emissions, you have service-based emissions. So any service that you buy, like a consulting service or a marketing, advertising agency, something like that. So the way it's usually being done, right, is taking the amount of money that you spent to acquire this service, and then you multiply it by what is called an emission factor. The problem here is that it's not necessarily because the service was more expensive that it emitted more CO2 emissions, right? And this was also the outcome of our study, that actually was not correlated, which was pretty inconvenient.
Yeah.
We, however, decided not to change it because you would essentially, I mean, the amount of work that we needed to do this study was tremendous, because we had to go to every supplier to ask them. So what we did is that we asked them, okay, how many hours did you work for us? Did you travel? Did you print any documents, to really try to measure concretely the CO2 emissions? So yes, in many cases, it's not fully accurate, definitely. I do think, and I mean, this is all very, very specific to service-based emissions, right? I mean, there are certain areas of scope 3 where, for instance, if you look at business travel, you fly from Paris to New York, we can estimate that pretty good, right? If you have the location and the airport in 1, airport 2, I think that's something that you can do really well. So it depends a little bit how your emissions are split. But I do think it gives a very good indication. And I do not think that you should stop collecting this information, as I said, because if your business has over 90% of its emissions that comes from indirect emissions, scope 3 emissions, you need to collect them. Of course, I think that there are ways to make it more accurate. And I do think that AI can definitely help us with that, with collecting the data, with having better emission factors, with being more accurate, to having ways to estimate it. So I definitely think this can definitely help us in making it more accurate and getting more granular data, which we really need.
That's interesting. I mean, it brings us on to AI. I mean, where are you currently seeing AI create some real value in sustainability work today, with where an improvement maybe can be measured? So
I would say there are 2 areas where I think AI can really help. So the first one is data collection, which is exactly what we talked about. So having, an agent, so an AI assistant, so to say, that would just go and ask for the data. And then for instance, depends a little bit how you collect your data, but it could be every month, for instance, you could have this agent send an email collect the information, add it to your software, make sure you have the right emission factors. So I think that's a tremendous help, because who wants to send follow-up emails to its suppliers and ask, hey, I hope you read my email. Here's a little reminder. There's just nobody has time for that. So I think that having AI automate that makes so much sense. And then the second area where I would say AI can definitely help with sustainability is for reporting. As what I can see today is that a lot of companies are really struggling with the amounts of reports they have to, the amount of reports that they have to do, because if you're an international company, you might have to create a report for California, for Canada, for Germany, for France, for Turkey, Spain, the list keeps on getting longer, right? And so I think that, in my opinion, a lot of companies are wasting time creating those reports, right? Because they just end up writing kind of the same thing, but for different standards and different rules. And then you have companies hiring people to just do that work, just to do one report for one country. But is it really providing additional value? I don't really think so. I don't think that this is, I would much rather hire someone to, to do volunteering work and to do, actual work that makes a difference, rather than just reporting for one more country. If you're already doing reporting, that makes sense. So in my opinion, using AI for reporting makes a lot of sense. There are, of course, areas where we need to be careful to still have good reports, not do greenwashing. I mean, of course, there's some risks, but in my opinion, I really think that data collection and sustainability reporting is where AI can have the biggest impact.
Okay, that's useful. I mean, as you've mentioned or intimated, AI can extract information from invoices, supplier documents, reports, and utility records. How reliable is that in practice, and what level of checking by humans is needed before the result enters a carbon inventory or regulated disclosure?
I would say, I can talk from experience with Brightest, because we have both of these tools. So we have agents who are able to collect data, and then we also have AI reporting tool. And I think for reporting, is quite accurate. I do think it's good to, double check and make sure that there are no anomalies in the data, right? But AI can even do that. I think for collecting the data, I do think it's really good right now. And if someone sends an email, says, okay, this is the number, it takes the number, it puts it in the report, it's not very complicated. I think that can be really accurate, in my opinion. On the other hand, for sustainability reporting, I think this is where there's more risk. I think, again, if it has the data, it knows exactly what to write. I think, you can be relatively safe. However, if it does not have data and you still ask it to write an answer, it will come up with something. And of course, this is the moment where you have room for hallucinations, greenwashing, and this is really where you have the risk, and where you really need to have someone look at every single answer generated by AI and double check that they use a source of information to write the answer, and to make sure that no greenwashing was being done. So, you can also train the AI to write in a certain way or have greenwashing checks. We also have a tool on Brightest that can scan reports for greenwashing. But I definitely think this is where we absolutely need sustainability professionals to check everything written by AI to make sure that there are no hallucinations and no greenwashing.
With a lot of the reporting that happens, and forgive my ignorance here, when the reporting is made, it is put out there into the public domain, is it being scrutinized by third parties, aside from those who are just taking an interest in that particular company, maybe? I'm wondering really where this does actually get checks, so that it isn't, maybe, we can look for greenwashing type wording in reports and such like. But even the data itself, it's AI is very good at obviously analyzing data where it has data, but maybe not so good at realizing that there are holes in the data, or that something is missing that it doesn't even know about. Where does this sort of scrutinization actually manifest? If businesses aren't doing it themselves through humans, is there any particular point thereafter where it's going to get picked up?
Yes, absolutely. Obviously, I think that's the moment where audits are really relevant, and that's something that we, of course, have on the Brightest tool, that auditors can come in, check the data, make sure that there is evidence for everything that you say. And I mean, you can do that with a tool or without a tool. I mean, I did it in my previous job by just sending emails back and forth to auditors and being like, okay, this is a proof for this number. This is a proof for this number. It can, of course, be done way more efficiently. But I do think that having auditors is very important, especially in the age of AI, as companies might just use AI and write some things that they haven't really checked. And they just, were like, oh, please write a section for this. And then, someone was a bit lazy and didn't double check. And then it wrote something completely wrong. And I think that's when the auditor is extremely important, because the auditor should have a look at everything, ask for proof for anything that was written, and also flag anything that looks weird. And we've seen that in some, I won't name any companies, but some companies have published reports where clearly this work was not done. And so I think that this human check, legal check, marketing check, right? Having multiple checks of people just reading the report and make sure everything makes sense is essential, for sure.
Okay. Are there current examples where AI is currently the wrong answer because a more clear process, conventional automaton, or a competent spreadsheet at the moment at least is cheaper or more transparent and maybe environmentally preferable?
Well, I definitely think you can overuse AI. I think, in some cases, if you're asking AI to do a very long, complex task that you might just do yourself, you always have to ask yourself, do I really need AI for this task? And I think it's also, an environmental consciousness, because, if you ask this AI to analyze a spreadsheet and then create other spreadsheet and then create an entire presentation and so on, it's like, yes, you can do it if you're really low on time and you're going to do something else in the meantime that's really efficient. But if you do that and then you go watch Netflix, it's like, well, maybe you shouldn't use AI.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Because using Netflix also, watching Netflix also emits emissions, which we don't talk about a lot. But there's some interesting comparison between using AI and watching Netflix, because you need to store the data as well. So I think, and we also don't want to delegate everything and become stupid at some point. You need to be able to work.
So true. It's an interesting point, isn't it? If you're not using AI to do something, can you do something else instead? Are you going to be using AI? It's it's going to be such an integral part of people's lives, I think, over the next generation, I'm sure. But most businesses will not be able to calculate precise footprints of every AI task, for example. What practical questions can a business leader ask to decide whether a proposed use for AI is proportionate and worthwhile? Or is it that a really difficult question, I'm sure, but what's the general thinking about how you go about balancing this in your head?
So I think for any leader who's thinking of adding AI tools to its various tools in a company, I would first ask myself, do I need AI? Because in many cases, I think that it's rather someone coming up to you and saying, oh, you should use a super cool AI tool. It's going to make your work so much easier. But do you really need that tool? And so I think it should be rather the opposite way, that you look at your business. And I mean, I know several people doing that kind of work and going in Sessimity teams and trying to assess, first of all, what takes you the most time. That you do not want to do. Because of course, if you love doing something, you should keep on doing it, just have a good time. But if you're doing something that's very time consuming and you hate doing it, then I think that's a perfect example of when you should be using AI, right? And so I think we need to shift the mindset of, instead of, just adopting some tools because it sounds great and it could save time, rather look at what are people spending a lot of time on and what do they not want to do. And that's really where you can make a real difference, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think there are some really good examples of that. As coming from a technical consultancy sort of background, you go into that sector or that service area because you love the environment, if you want to be an environmental consultant. But suddenly, as you go through your career, you're taking on different tasks. You're doing more management tasks. You're doing more QA. You're doing more HR. You're doing more budgeting. You're doing more invoicing, and all these things can suddenly destroy the joy that you used to have in that job. So yeah, I can get that completely. And AI, of course, is usually experienced through a clean interface, but it's dependent on very physical infrastructure out in the cloud. When a business claims to be using AI responsibly, what should this mean? What What impact should it count beyond the electricity used for an individual report?
So I would say there are different metrics that you can measure as a business. So there are three main things that you can measure from a physical point of view: carbon, water, and minerals. So I would say these are the three metrics that you can measure. And you actually have companies as well providing these kind of tools where you can see different AI models and the kind of impact that they have in terms of carbon, water, and critical minerals. So I think this is really where our focus should lie. And there are different metrics, and here maybe it gets technical, that you can use. So for instance, when it comes to electricity, you can use power usage effectiveness. And so this is a metric that essentially tells you how effectively is a company or is a data center using energy. Another one is water usage effectiveness. And here you essentially look at the same thing. So you look at how efficiently is a data center using water. So I think already, if you go, you want to work with a company, you want to use AI, asking them, what is your PUE? What is your WUE? I think that already gives you a good indication of whether they're doing the work or not. For critical minerals, it becomes a little bit more complex, obviously. And the traceability of gold and silicon and cobalt is not always amazing. So that becomes a bit trickier. But I think that for carbon and water, that these are already very good metrics that we can use.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, are there standards already in place or coming through? I mean, obviously they won't be worldwide, but are there requirements there for data centers to provide that kind of information? Or again, are we looking at difficult to find data to try and take that into account?
Not really. I mean, there are some regulations in Europe when it comes to efficiency, but worldwide, and I mean, it's important to note that half of the data center worldwide are located in the United States. There's not really a standard on, what should be the minimum, power usage effectiveness, or or the maximum rather, because the lower, the better. And it's of course political as well. I mean, same thing for renewable energy, right? It's also a very good metric to measure, to say, okay, what is the percentage of renewable energy that a data center uses? And again, there's not really a rule that says you need to use 50% of renewable energy in your data centers right now.
Okay, so you've mentioned that there are embodied impacts, environmental impacts from, say, chip manufacturing, construction of the data centers, maybe backup generation, grid connections, and ongoing hardware replacement. So these effects are so much less visible in corporate AI discussions. Are they considered to have been dealt with at the inception stage? By that I mean when a data center's construction has been approved, for example, or is it, and therefore is it just the ongoing new sort of energy or water usage that users of data centers should be taking into account? Where's this boundary?
It really depends on the company. So we'll not say any names for the ones who are not doing a very good work, but some company have been building data centers in a very unsustainable way. And I think clearly they know how to make it more sustainable, but the priority is not sustainability. The priority is just speed. So getting, data centers built very quickly, no matter what the cost is, no matter what is the cost, the economic cost and the environmental cost. Some companies, on the other hand, are definitely doing a better work, like Google, for instance, as they do co-location. An example in the Netherlands where you can see where they build the wind turbines and then they have the data center right next to it. So that's a perfect example of co-location in which you have everything in the same place, and then you can have a lot of energy, and then you can have the data center there. Amazing. And that's what companies should be doing, obviously, because in many cases, they're rather buying certificates. So they're not really producing or using renewable energy, but just using fossil fuels and then buying certificates, which is not ideal. Of course, ideally, they use the renewable energy right away. So I definitely think that if you want to be sustainable and if you want to use renewable energy, you need to do it from the start, right? As I said, if you want to do co-location, you need to build your data center next to a source, next to a renewable energy source. And so that is not a coincidence. That's not something you can change so quickly later on. Fortunately, some companies do not have this priority, which is a shame because solar energy is one of the quickest way to get energy, for instance, and one of the cheapest. So it does seem to make a lot of sense, but that's not necessarily how some companies think right now.
Yeah, and it shouldn't just be the companies thinking that way either. I mean, local governments or even national governments should be setting the policies to, prefer approvals for those kind of developments. I think where co-location is a clear feature of that proposal. You might not know much about this, but some projects propose using waste heat from data centers for homes, agriculture, or industry. Is this genuinely a scalable benefit, or is it sometimes a useful story attached to infrastructure whose overall demand is still rising rapidly?
So I actually did a podcast episode about this.
Okay.
Called Growing Tomatoes with Data Centers. And so the person who joined the podcast was saying that you can use the heat from data centers to grow tomatoes. So because the problem is that right now in greenhouses, you need to generate heat, right, to grow tomatoes or any fruits or vegetables, right, when you don't have the sun. And that's very often the case right now for agriculture, that food is being grown in greenhouses. But then the heat that is being generated is generated by fossil fuel. So that's a problem. Now, what you can do, and I've heard different opinions about this. I've heard that this is not very scalable. I've heard that it is. I'm not, enough of an expert in heat from data center to say what's a good solution. It does seem to me that it is a feasible solution, but of course, I guess it's a matter of space, of location, how close do you have the place of growing food next to the data center? Is it really safe? Is it really feasible? To me, it sounds like a great solution. And I want to believe it's possible, but probably a data center developer will tell you that it creates some difficulties. And I know that Germany has created rules for reusing heat, and this is causing some headaches for data center developers.
Yeah. Well, hopefully ones that result in good outcomes. But so, I mean, efficiency improvements are often presented as the answer. So, but if cheaper computing leads to far more AI use, could efficiency actually increase total resource demand through a bit of a rebound effect? I'm thinking about the Jevons paradox here. Do we know what will win out here, or is it just too complex to know?
Yeah, so I mean, the Jevons paradox is something that people in this field talk about a lot, of course, which is that essentially AI is becoming more and more efficient, and then people use it more and more, and it's become cheaper, right? And then even though it's becoming more efficient, you keep on having more CO2 emissions and more resources used. I do think it is true to a certain extent. However, people are not going to stop using AI. I do think that right now there's a very strong trend, which is that people are adopting AI at an incredible scale. So you have to make it more efficient, regardless of what will happen, because people will just keep on using it more. You have to make it more efficient. You have to use renewable energy. You have to think of ways to repair equipments in data centers, reuse them, refurbish them, reuse, all the critical minerals to minimize mining. Think of gold, for instance, or cobalt. You have to do it all.
Yeah.
That's the only way moving forward, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you're probably correct with that. I mean, that the use of AI and the uptake of it isn't really being driven by, the efficiency of it or how energy efficient it is or how sustainable it is. It is just because of the perceived or actual benefits of AI. And obviously, as more and more people start to use it, then inevitably it will just grow on that basis. So we've talked a little bit about greenwashing earlier, and you've written about identifying it through specificity, evidence, and methodology. And AI obviously has the potential to make greenwashing easier. Is this a danger to people's trust and reliance on brands they may want to choose between?
Absolutely. I definitely see, and that has come up several times already in sustainability reports, that greenwashing was found and hallucinations were found. So I do think it is a trend, and I do think that there's quite a risk for sure to use AI, fire people, and then just, over rely on AI to publish sustainability reports. And then if you keep on doing that, people will lose trust because, if they read a report and it just looks so AI generated, and you have these typical M dash, right? These like long lines, and everything just sounds so fake. That definitely removes trust from people. So this is really where we need sustainability professionals to stay in company and leverage AI, of course, that's great because they're already overloaded with work, understaffed. So that is great for them. That is not, really threatening their job. But any company who thinks I can just use AI and replace my Sessimity team, that's a bad idea, in my opinion, because people are going to lose trust. They will see that you're using AI, and then there will be mistakes. There will be greenwashing. So we need the people to do this proof checking and add this human touch that people want to see.
Yeah. And I think it can work both ways, can't it? It's not just businesses that are using AI these days. Anybody in the public with access to a computer and the internet can start using AI, and they can start throwing mud at companies. And again, we can end up with a situation of who do you believe? And some people who just don't want to think about it anymore, whose job it isn't to think about it, will just come up with their conclusion, well, it's just more AI slop. You can't trust it. It's hallucinating again. People are using it to just argue their cause, their particular direction that they want to promote. So where does the responsibility really and the accountability and the trustworthiness of it really come back? Is it the sustainability professional? Is it going right up to the chief executives, the board? What makes it, gives it that credibility, that really solid foundation?
I think a bit of a mix of everybody, a mix of the accessibility team, the marketing team, the board. Legal team legal team definitely has a very big role to play because they're the ones who are supposed to make sure that they don't put a company at risk. So I would hope they make a good job reviewing those reports. The auditing team is very important as well. Of course, it depends on the scale of a company, right? Of how large is it? Because not every company has a legal team or auditors. But I think it's really the more people check the report, the better it will be, so to say.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think just moving on from that, because I can see we go down a rabbit hole here and nobody will have the right sort of just completely defendable sort of solution to that. But I think, as long as there are humans who have responsibility for the outputs and take take that accountability, then hopefully the trust that AI is a tool and not the person doing the work, then hopefully then it will just either maintain, improve, or just garner complete trust. Just moving on from that, so bringing it maybe down to earth a little bit from sky high thinking. Small businesses are obviously, looking at implementing AI, and bigger businesses obviously looking to roll it out further. And Brightest, your work there has introduced a responsible use of AI policy. What sort of principles should every organisation, large or small, include in such a policy, even if it's only beginning to experiment with AI?
I think that one part of our responsible use of AI that is definitely important is not to use the data of your customers to train your own AI. I think this is definitely something that can be, let's say, scary for customers. So I think that is definitely important to make sure that you inform your customers on how are you using their data. Are you, using their data to train your AI? And we've been very clear that we're not doing that. And I think that's definitely something important to include in such a policy.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you've got experience firsthand yourself, but organizations often respond to risk by creating the policy, and that policy might get read once, it might not get read at all by certain co-workers. I mean, how do you turn governance into everyday decisions about tools, data and outputs that is practical to use?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's when you have these policies, it's hard to have them implemented, and I've seen that firsthand. And so I think that it's a boring part of starting a new job, but making sure that everybody gets trained on those policies, that you have a checklist of what policies what trainings have you done. I mean, we have trainings at Brightest for all kinds of things when people start, and reading this responsible AI policy is part of it. So I think that's really important. And then also making sure that you have reminders, so to say, so that as you stay in the company, you have more trainings, more conversations about that, so that people are aware of those rules or in these regulations and can then use them in in their day-to-day work. So I think that's definitely important. That's really the first step, and the most important one is really awareness.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so you might be seeing AI being adopted in different businesses as well as your employers. What sort of mistakes do you see? Is it choosing technology before the problem has been properly sort of analyzed? Is it trusting poor data, not having well organized data, under investing in training, maybe failing to involve the right people? What sort of things have you seen, if any?
I think multiple ones, actually.
Okay.
Perhaps I think one of the common theme I've seen is the lack of skills, lack of skill sets in a company of someone who knows enough about the topic to be able to implement AI. I think this is something that I see where they don't really have the internal skills, so they need to be trained in the first place to implement AI. I think, of course, you also have risk, right, of data privacy, your client or your employees using AI, and disclosing confidential information. I think that can also be a problem. I think a lot of different things that can happen for sure.
Okay. So let's look positively at AI. Looking 5 years ahead, where do you think AI could make the most meaningful, positive contribution to sustainability, rather than simply making existing reporting processes faster, for example?
I think that a very exciting area where sustainability can have an impact, or AI can have an impact on sustainability, and I wrote about this in a chapter of my book, Agriculture and Foods. Right now, and I mean, we have seen that all across Europe, worldwide. We're definitely facing very difficult weather for agriculture, right? Very little rain, a lot of sun, very warm temperatures, which makes agriculture very difficult and very complicated. And I think this is really where smart farming can be quite revolutionary by having sensors that can track, how much moisture do you have in the soil, how much fertilizers are you using, what is the health of the soil, right? You can have all sorts of solutions to I don't know if there's a series that I really like called Clarkson Farm. I don't know if you watched that on Amazon Prime. And I think that's a great example of how you see the impact of climate change and how the owner of this farm start using sensors, and he sees the benefit that it can have of using data on our earth to do better farming. And so I think we are just at the beginning right now, but this is definitely a very exciting area on how to use less fertilizer, less water, and grow better foods. So this is definitely an area that excites me a lot. And I think that will be quite revolutionary in the future as our population is growing and we need more foods. So we definitely need to improve our farming system.
Yep, that sounds good. So which concern deserves more attention right now? Is it rising electricity demand, water stress, physical infrastructure, supply chain impact, or the lack of comparable disclosure? What do you think is the most pressing sort of issue?
I would say perhaps the latter. I think that the lack of reporting right now is definitely an issue. I mean, you can see that the biggest AI models are not reporting. They don't have a climate report. They don't have any information that they disclose. And I think that's really problematic. I definitely think that we need to have this information. We need to hold them accountable, and we need to have this data. And I mean, they're obviously arguing for the fact that they need to compete against each other, and these are trade secrets. But we cannot keep on moving forward like that with an industry that is growing at an unprecedented rate without disclosing their carbon emissions, without disclosing their water. I have seen some new jobs appearing from OpenAI, for instance, ChatGPT recruiting people in the environmental field. So that's very positive. I'm very keen to see what they will do. So that's good. Anthropic with cloud also bought some carbon credits most recently. So that also shows that they're starting to think about this and they're starting to care more, I would say. But yeah, I think we need a lot more than that.
Yeah, I mean, it's on people's minds, isn't it? So you'd think it would become a selling point of a particular GPT, or AI offering. If people are trying to make good choices, the younger demographic are environmentally conscious. They want to embrace technology maybe more than anyone else. It seems like a no-brainer. But if you're trying to compare yourself against someone else who doesn't report anything, you don't know whether that report is a good report output or it's bad, so it really needs all of them to be doing it to make a meaningful difference, I guess. So just on that subject, I guess, do you expect environmental performance to become a normal criterion in the future when businesses are procuring AI, obviously alongside security, privacy, and price, but or will it maybe always remain secondary until maybe regulation is brought in or published standards force the issue?
I do think it will become the norm. I don't see any other way it could not be, because we're definitely experiencing stronger impacts from climate change every year. So I don't think that companies can just keep on operating without doing anything about it. I don't see in what world that would be possible and how people would accept that. And I think that regulators are definitely coming in strong with ideas and with policies. I definitely think this is the direction we're going right now.
Okay. And just as a sustainability professional, have you seen the role change? I mean, as AI handles more data preparation and drafting, what becomes more valuable in a sustainability professional? Is it the technical knowledge, applying professional skepticism, good communication, ethical judgment, or the ability to challenge greenwashing, this kind of thing? Where does the value lie moving forward? Is the role changing?
Yes, I definitely think so. So I do think that it is important for sustainability professionals to know how to use AI. And I know that some people are not very keen on doing it, perhaps. But I do think that if you want to stay relevant in the job market, whatever you're doing, unless, you're working on a manual job, and then I think you're safe, if anything. So keep on doing that. But I think for anyone working in a company, working on a computer, you probably need to learn how to use AI if you want to keep your job. But then I do think that there are a lot of other skills that are really important and that will become more important with AI, such as empathy, right? Leadership skills, obviously, because, if an AI bot tells me what to do, I might or might not listen to it, but I won't probably respect it that much compared to listening to my boss who tells me you need to do that. And I'm like, okay, yeah, he's my boss. I respect him. He's a human. So I respect his authority. So I definitely think that those kind of skills, specifically human skills, will be essential.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, if you have more and more conversations with ChatGPT and it gets to know you, you can almost fall into a trap because of the way it talks to you in thinking that you're talking to a human. We've become so used to messaging people, through the old days on MSN Messenger and obviously in WhatsApp and such like now, obviously email as well. You sort of, you look at written text in a different way in this messaging sort of world. In that sort of context, you can fall into the trap of thinking you are talking to a human, and it almost gives the impression of understanding its own humor that it's applying to you, and it's got that bonhomie about it. You can tell it anything, and you're not at risk of upsetting anyone. It's a strange situation to find yourself in. Just what do you think responsible AI adoption would look like if businesses treated computing resources as something that they have to budget and justify in sustainability terms rather than an apparently unlimited utility? Is that an angle that maybe may come into people's thinking, or is the power of AI just too great to overcome and we're just going to use it for everything? Blink and just keep going.
Yes, I mean, this is definitely an interesting idea and concept. And I actually spoke with this company called What that I will also be doing a podcast episode with, actually. And what they do is that they provide access to open weight models to companies who want to use AI. And they pick specifically more sustainable models, but they try to have a bit of a mix so that everybody can find what they want, even more powerful models. And they then give you the options to pay per kilowatt hour, which I think is a very interesting perspective, because all of a sudden you're paying for your environmental footprint, right? Instead of per token, which is the usual metric for purchasing AI. And so I think this is a fantastic idea. It should become a norm, honestly. So I really like their approach and their perspective on that.
That would be interesting. I wouldn't have a clue how many. I mean, this is the point, isn't it? It starts making you think how many kilowatts or megawatts you as a company or as an individual are going to be using. And to start with, you just wouldn't have a clue. So if nothing else, just bringing that aspect firmly into focus would be fantastic. So to finish off,
Absolutely.
I've got some quick fire questions, if that's okay. What is the one use of AI in sustainability that is you think currently underrated?
I would say biodiversity. I definitely think that we don't talk about biodiversity a lot when we talk about AI, but there is an incredible potential for using biodiversity with AI.
Okay, interesting. I wanted a short answer, but what sort of angles are you specifically thinking of?
I give you a short answer. So what I think is really interesting with, and this is something that I also write about in my book, is that so when you measure biodiversity, usually what you would do is go into a forest, with a recorder and then listen to all the different sounds to try to assess what different, let's say, birds are in the forest or what species are in the forest. The problem with that approach is that it might not be very accurate. First of all, it's very time consuming. You need to go there and you need to spend time and you need skilled people, which are not necessarily very easy to find. And then you need to go back home and analyze all the different records. And so that's going to be a very time consuming task, right? What's great with AI is that you can do this work so much more efficiently and a lot cheaper as well, because in a lot of places, you don't have the data on biodiversity. We don't know how many species are there. We just don't have the information. And so this is really a game changer, in my opinion, in terms of measuring the number of species that you have, both plant and animal species. As AI is able to basically listen to overlapping sounds, it's also able to listen to water, like to different species underwater, which is also much harder to do and very costly. So I think this could definitely help us in conserving biodiversity.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, really. I mean, when you think about how many microphones there are listening out there in the world today, not for the purpose of biodiversity, but are there recording or certainly hearing information.
Exactly.
The same with cameras as well. And of course, there's bats, there's birds flying around, migrating, and all of this is getting picked up periodically. The other one that comes to mind is using metagenomics as well. The amount of environmental DNA that is in the environment, which it's huge amounts of data to analyze, that it just makes it impractical for humans to do it, especially those with, when there's so few with the technical knowledge and know how to do it. AI could change all of that. So yeah, a really interesting point. So conversely then, what is one use of AI in sustainability that is maybe overhyped?
Perhaps reporting.
Okay.
We've talked about it a lot. I do think it's a really good use case, but you definitely have a lot of players doing that, and you definitely have a lot of companies providing this kind of services and a lot of people talking about it. So I would say to a certain extent, I think carbon accounting is the same thing. Everybody talks about it, that there's so much. So I definitely think that perhaps we should be focusing on that. Of course, I do think it is a great tool, but as I said, biodiversity, water, waste, circular economy, I do think there's lots of other use cases.
Yes, it's impressive. So I usually ask my guests this one question at the end, and it's about recommending a must-read book. And you might have one in mind anyway, which you're welcome to mention. But obviously, you've mentioned that you're writing your own book, How Green is AI, which excitingly is due out next year. So instead, I'm going to give you the opportunity. Please tell us about that. What inspired you to write this book, and what will it really tell us about?
Absolutely. So How Green is AI is a book that really investigates the environmental impact of AI. So I spend a lot of time looking at research, doing interviews through my podcast, but also interviewing other experts to understand what is the carbon footprint of AI, water, and critical minerals. So really the three areas that are most important. But then I also looked at all the different solutions, right, that are out there, which is why, I can talk to you about biodiversity and waste and all these different tools, agriculture. So I think there are so many interesting solutions. And then the last part of the book essentially talks about how to make AI more sustainable moving forward, but also, what can you do as an individual to reduce your environmental impact when using AI, which I think is of course essential as well. and also looking at policies, regulations. How can we make it more sustainable moving forward? Definitely very excited to publish it. For anyone who's interested in reading the book, I also have a newsletter about it on Substack called How Green is AI, so that you can follow all the updates on the book.
Brilliant. That is very exciting. So yeah, looking forward to that. So Nina, thank you for bringing such a balanced and practical perspective into a debate that is often presented as a choice between unquestioning enthusiasm for AI and complete rejection. So I have particularly enjoyed exploring how businesses can use AI to improve sustainability work whilst remaining honest about the evidence and the judgment involved. It's been a real pleasure having you on Aligned on AI. So thank you for joining me, Nina Benoit.
Thank you so much, Carl.
And for our audience, if you enjoyed this episode too, please follow Aligned Minds on LinkedIn for practical AI tips and updates on future episodes of Aligned on AI. I will share details of today's podcast and guest on LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. But please do subscribe to the Aligned on AI channel on your favorite podcast app, and please do give me a follow on LinkedIn for more content like this.